Okay, good evening, everybody. We'd like to call the meeting to order. We'll start off with the land acknowledgement. So Grimsby is situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattah-Wendouraq, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across the Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The regional municipality of Niagara and Grimsby stand with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands in which we live. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Can I please get a mover and seconder to approve the agenda? Moved by Member Drew, seconded by Member Potter. The next for the receipt of previous minutes. Can I get it?
You just got to read out the motion.
All right. Okay. Resolved that the March 27th, 2024 Planning and Development meeting agenda be approved. Okay. Carried. Okay. Next is the receipt of previous minutes. For the Planning and Development Committee from March 6th, can I please get a mover and seconder to receive the previous minutes? Moved by Councillor Frake and seconded by Member Potter. Resolved that the March 6th, 2024 Planning and Development Committee minutes be received. All those in favor? Carried. So there are no formal delegations and no consent reports, which moves us on to Section 8, which is the public meeting for the property at 540 to 544 North Service Road. Now we're moving into the public meeting for the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications for the property at 540 and 544 North Service Road. The premise of this public meeting is to provide the opportunity for the public to provide input on the proposed application. I would like to stress that there have been no decisions or recommendations made by council or planning staff at this time. This meeting is conducted in accordance with the town's procedural bylaw. All participants are asked to conduct themselves with decorum and respect and provide the opportunity for all members of the public to express their opinion in an environment of tolerance on all viewpoints, all points of view, and free of intimidation. If a person or public body would otherwise have an ability to appeal the decision of the Council of the Town of Grimsby to the Ontario Land Tribunal, but the person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Town of Grimsby before the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is adopted, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at the public meeting or make written submissions to the Town of Grimsby before the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is adopted, the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal, unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to add the person or public body as a party. With us this evening are the agents Ryan Ferrari and Frank Klubhofer from AJ Clark and Associates, and planning staff Manny Singh, planner Walter Basic, the Assistant Director of Planning. So just an information brief. Tonight we will start with the planning staff providing a brief presentation outlining the process and an overview of the application from a planning perspective. A reminder that the opportunity for questions and input will be available after both presentations. Manny and Walter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Before we get started, I just noticed that, and I've heard some complaints, the back row is having difficulty hearing because the glass is open. So if we could speak into the microphone a little bit better, so when anybody is speaking, that would be appreciated by the back row. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Manny Singh. I'm the planner with the town on this application. I want to thank you all for taking your time out of your schedule to attend the public meeting. It's good to see a good turnout. for a planning application, and especially an important planning application like this. So today we have an official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment for 540, 544 North Service Road. I'll refer to these as an OPA and a ZBA to make things easy. Let's go back one slide. Yeah, on the screen you can see the sites in question and the surrounding context within the Winston Road neighborhood, which a lot of us might be really familiar with. Next slide. So to begin this public meeting, I'll be going through a short presentation providing an overview of the application from a planning perspective and some background about the process. Ryan and Franz from AJ Clark are also here to provide some greater details about the application and will follow me. And after that, will be a chance for everyone else to provide your thoughts and ask questions. Next slide. So for today's meeting, in addition to the application itself, I'll give an overview of the planning process. For some, this may be new to you, whereas for others, this will be a bit of a refresher. And an overview of the policy and regulatory framework would also be provided, including the relevant OP policies and zoning provisions that are in place. And then the applicant team will provide you with some additional details and clarifications about the proposal. And finally, and most importantly, we're here to answer any questions you may have and gather any feedback. And of course, the feedback will be taken into consideration and will help identify any potential revisions or modifications that may be needed to the application. So, why can plans or bylaws change? Under the Planning Act, proponents are able to submit development plans that may not meet the current official plan or zoning bylaw. The town's role is to review these applications and provide a professional recommendation to council whether the applications can be supported. These applications are only able to amend the official plan or zoning bylaw if it's determined that the proposed changes comply with the overall intent of the official plan, and the result of these changes is a development that is compatible with the surrounding area. Or in other words, whether these developments represent good planning. I want to note that the town, which is staff and council, have 120 days to decide on an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment application. So this is why we're having a public meeting at this stage, which is relatively early in the beginning stage, to basically allow for any revisions that may spur from the meeting. Next slide. So here's a flow chart that outlines the major milestones in the planning process. So an application for an OPA and ZBA all began with a pre-consultation meeting that the applicant had with town staff and any relevant agency like Niagara Region and the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. The meeting outlines the requirements that a potential applicant would need to submit for a complete application or a complete submission for an OPA and ZBA application. So we had this pre-consultation meeting in February of last year. The application was then marked as being a complete application this February and was circulated to external agencies, including Niagara Region, the Conservation Authority, the Ministry of Transportation, and Public Utilities. At the same time, the application is being reviewed by the town's departments, including planning, public works, and engineering, and Parks and Rec, and Grimsby Fire. And of course, the public is also able to provide comments at this time and would be able to do so until a decision on the application has been made. For this application, any documents related to the proposal are also posted on the current planning applications page of the town's website. All notices for public meetings are also posted on this page and on the town's notices page. So following this public meeting and the analysis and review period, staff are going to prepare a recommendation report for council by May 27th, and a council decision is expected on June 3rd, and there would also be an appeal period that follows this decision. Next slide. So the planning process is an open process, and it's encouraged that members of the public communicate their thoughts. In addition to tonight's public meeting, you can also write a letter or email addressed to the planning department to provide comments. The email is planning@grimsby.ca. You can also send a copy of your letter or email to your councilors as an alternative. Comments will be continued to be accepted until the staff recommendation report is prepared. So, next slide. So on to the application and proposal itself. We have a proposal for 2 full residential towers for the site at 22 and 16 stories respectively. The west tower is 22 stories. The east tower is 16 stories to be proposed. Each have a 6-story podium, which is supposed to be for residential and amenity space for the residents of the towers. Altogether, we have 548 units proposed. There's 5 levels of underground parking proposed, which also allows for 606 motor vehicle spaces at a ratio of 1.1 spaces per unit. In addition, there are 417 bicycle spaces proposed, which is a percentage of 69% of, approximately 69% of the number of vehicle spaces. So a floor area ratio of 7.59 is proposed, which represents the density of the buildings. This is at a ratio. This is a ratio of gross floor area divided by lot size. There's also, from perspective of constraints for the site, there's a setback that is required by the Ministry of Transportation for 14 meters from the property line. So within the setback, no structure below, above, or at ground level can be built, and no parking that would be satisfied, that would be used to satisfy zoning requirements can be built. And another constraint, so to speak, there's 2 streams representing potential ecosystem areas that are on either side of the property, or on the west edge of the property and nearby towards the eastern property line. Next slide. So here's a survey of the 2 properties, 2 current properties, which gives an idea of what's there currently. There's a structure on the left, on the west, which is 544 North Service Road, and it's currently a vacant area on the east on 540 North Service Road. The aforementioned stream that I mentioned is right at the property edge on the west. Next slide. We'll keep this up for a bit. Here's what's proposed for the site. There's 2 towers with 2 access points for vehicles. There's a public sidewalk proposed through the site at the edge where the closest to the North Service Road. There's a roundabout in the middle, which provides access for a loading area and some surface parking for tuck under parking, so parking under the second floor of the building on the east, so at ground level. There's also landscaping strips all around the proposed buildings on the west, north, and east property edges. And next slide. So here's the official plan policy area for reference. The site right now is within the urban settlement area, and it's within a designated greenfield site, which is an area devoted for urban development. I'll leave this up for a bit for everybody to take a look at. And let's go move on to the next one. So Schedule B1 shows specifically the land use designations that are in effect for the area. It's currently designated as residential slash mixed use under the current schedule. Within this designation, these lands are considered to be ideal locations for a mixture of residential, convenience, retail, service, commercial, and prestige employment uses. So the concept of a mixed use. The height limits currently for a mixed use designation is 2 to 4 stories. And the town may permit higher height limits, which are devoted to a high density mixed use area through approved secondary plans like the Winston Road secondary plan. Also, on the site area, there's the identified environmental protection areas, which are the 2 streams on either side of the property that lead towards Lake Ontario. And the star is where the site is on the image. Next slide. So this schedule depicts the Winston Road secondary plan. The current designation is a mixed-use medium density, which includes uses like townhouses and low-rise apartments. A maximum height of a high-density area, in contrast, is 12 stories. The nature, like I said, of a mixed-use area, that there's a mixture of housing and employment, retail, that kind of thing within, within the same area, within walking distance. So one of the policies within this area is that there is a ratio of 1 job per 3 residents expected. The Winston Road secondary plan also has detailed urban design components that include provisions for view corridors of the escarpment and the lake. And there's also a similar environmental protection area that's denoted on the plan. Within this area, a buffer of 30 meters is to be provided, which can be reduced with a reviewed environmental impacts statement that will be provided. Next slide. So yeah, quick summary. The current designations of the site are residential mixed use under the official plan, mixed use medium density under the Winston Road secondary plan, and partially an environmental protection area under the secondary plan. So the proposed amendments is to change the area to a mixed use high density area, which would also permit heights of 22 stories and 16 stories for the respective buildings. And further amendments for policy 11.3.3.2B to not apply, which is a policy that denotes a maximum floor area of 3 for the area, which is the density, like I said. And for 11.3.2.2H, which is a requirement for employment areas within that designation to be 30% of the land area. So for that policy, there's an amendment for that policy to not apply. Next slide. So zoning-wise, the current zoning is for service commercial zoning, and the proposed amendment is to change this to a holding area for a mixed-use high-density area. And there are site-specific exceptions, a whole list of them on the next slide, which we'll go to. You don't have to necessarily read through all these, but these are amendments or site-specific policies for setbacks, for maximum height, for a parking ratio of 1.1 per unit, For something like an angular plane to not apply, that's basically applies to tall buildings in relation to adjacent areas, and for the employment area requirements to not apply, and for a density of 7.59 floor area to be permitted, and finally for a maximum lot coverage of 44% to be permitted. And there's a lot to take in, but this concludes my presentation for now, but happy to take your questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Manny, for your presentation. Next, we're going to have the consultants, Ryan and Franz. The floor is yours.
All right. Afternoon, everyone. I assume everyone can hear me loud enough in the back. All right. So good evening, folks. Thank you for coming out. As staff noted, my name is Ryan Ferrari. I'm a registered professional planner, and I work for a firm called AJ Clark & Associates. I have with me today one of the principals of the firm, Mr. Franz Kleiphofer. And we also have representatives from the property owner, LJM Developments, here as well. The way I like to start off open house meetings, we've done a lot of them over the years. We're here to answer as many questions as we can tonight. With that being said, we may not be able to get to all of them. Sometimes there's technical questions that come up. We'll certainly do our best to answer them all. All the feedback that staff get today, I think it's important to note, are recorded and given to us after this meeting. So even if it's a question for whatever reason we can't answer today, we'll certainly do our best to get back to staff, and through staff they can communicate back to you. So I think that's just important to start with. Next slide, please. So today, of course, we're talking about a development located at 540 and 544 North Service Road. Manny provided a high-level overview of the application. Through this slide deck, I want to give everyone a little bit more fine granular detail about what we're proposing, and provide as much detail as possible. Like I said, I'm sure there'll be questions after we'll be available to answer. Just in summary, so Manny mentioned that we submitted applications to the city. In effect, what these applications are doing is we're asking for a couple amendments. The first one effectively is to permit an apartment building on site. An apartment building is not permitted on this site currently. It's to increase the height and density. We're asking for actually a decrease in parking rate, and I'll discuss that a little bit more later on in the presentation. And Manny did put a bunch of regulations up there, but I think what I want to stress is a lot of those regulations we provide are to achieve what we would call built form. So on the right there is a rendering of our project. When I say built form, and I'll go into this a little bit further detail, it'll control things like height, the podium height, the type of glazing we have, where the parking is located, bike parking, all these sorts of things. So I'll get into that a little bit later. But essentially, if we were to distill it down into those four things, those are the four permissions we're seeking from the city. And what they are going, or what we hope they're going to achieve, is the buildings you see on the right. Next slide, please. Anytime I'm giving a presentation to the public, I think it's important for the public to understand where this is all coming from, okay? Oftentimes when planners and architects propose buildings, it doesn't come out of thin air. There's a million different factors, some of which is viability, some of which is context, some of which is what is available in the surrounding neighborhood. So what I just wanted to show here to everyone, so the subject site is outlined in red there. I drew this yellow dotted line. It's approximately 500 meters. 500 meters we like to use is about, give or take, about a 10-minute walk for most folks. And I think what's important and why we've seen so much development in this area is your access to the lake. We're close to 50 Point Conservation Authority, a conservation area, I should say. And we're close to Grimsby on the lake. So it's why this place has sprung up as much as it has, and is why this development, or well, the site, I should say, is so attractive for development. So I think that's important to know. Next slide, please. So zooming in closer to the site's outlined in red. I just want to point out a couple things on the slide. On the left side of the slide, to the west, is a condominium called Waterview. It's built. It is 15 stories in height. Manny talked about 2 watercourses. So just to quickly touch on them. On the west side, that space between the existing condo and our site is a watercourse. It's a watercourse that we've studied through what's called an environmental impact statement. We hired consultants to do that. They went in, they studied the plants, the flow of water in there. They've determined, and we've talked to the Conservation Authority about this, that this development won't have any major impacts on it. Effectively, it operates as a ditch with some plants in it at this point. So we're confident that we're not impacting that watercourse. There's a watercourse on the east, which is on the right side. It's not part of our property. We're required to have at least a 5-meter setback from that watercourse. That's in consultation with the Conservation Authority. I just felt like that was important to mention. And of course, we have a range of townhouses, especially to the north of us. I do want to point out, at least for right now, and I have more slides to talk about this later on, what we have on our site are buildings that provide a setback from the red property. And the nice part about the setback is we have a buffer in terms of a parking area and a private road as well. And I'll discuss that a little bit more, but I just want to provide some context in terms of the immediate context of the site. Next slide, please. One important thing I want to touch on, and I think, and you can kind of see this to the west of the 15-story condo, we have our lands outlined in red there, right smack dab in the middle of that slide. We also have part of the lands outlined in yellow. Anytime you develop land beside an MTO highway, could be the 400 series highway or another type of MTO highway, there's a significant setback. It has to be at least 14 meters from the property line. And that part is shown in yellow there. I know our front lot line is irregular, but effectively what that means is you can't build in that place. You can have parking there if you wish, but it can't be any required parking per the bylaw. What we've chosen to do, and I have a slide showing this a little bit later on, is in lieu of parking, we're proposing a large landscape buffer in front of there, as well as a sidewalk. So I just think that's important to note. The site is constrained by this MTO setback. And just for anyone who's curious, it's just required because if MTO, for whatever reason, decides to expand the highway in some future, there's no buildings in the way. Next slide, please. Okay, back to context. Building heights. There's been a lot of development in this neighborhood over the years. We have a 15-story building which exists. Our land's outlined in red. We're proposing 2 separate, a 22-story and a 16-story tower. Moving towards the east, 8 stories. Odyssey is the condo that was just recently completed. That's at 20 stories, right on Grimsby on the Lake. That one, I have some photos of that ahead, but that one also has townhouses surrounding it as well. We have 6 stories, 5, 10, and east of the Casablanca Boulevard exit is an ongoing development application. It's not approved, but they're proposing multiple buildings, 18, 22, 14, 12, 14. I just want to be clear that those buildings aren't approved, but again, this is the context that we're talking about that helps to inform what we're proposing today. Next slide, please. Odyssey, I hope everyone's been by it. It's actually a development that A.G. Clark was involved with as well. This is a 20-story condominium surrounded by townhomes. It's built, it's occupied today. Next slide, please. I chose this on purpose. I didn't want to provide a rendering of Waterview, but so Waterview's 15 stories. And just a couple things I want to note for everyone in the audience today. The design of this building is much different than the building being proposed. There's a very, very important reason for that, and that's how loud the highway is. So what you see there is basically a single loaded hallway where there's units behind it. That's to mitigate noise from the highway. That's why the building looks like that. It's got ground floor commercial. We have parking beside the highway, and it's in stark, and we can see Odyssey actually in the background there, the 20-story building. Our site's just beside this. Next slide, please. So ground floor plan. Manny alluded to this. So I won't repeat exactly what he said, but effectively on the ground floor, we have a central driveway entrance, which leads into both buildings. There, underneath this is a large parking structure that's underground that connects the two buildings together. So the parking is connected together. It goes down 5 floors. The towers are separated. This is the ground floor plan that you see, which is outlined in kind of that thick black line. I think it's important to know that these buildings don't follow this black outline and go up 22 and 16 stories. There are various step backs that are purposely put there. So I just want to make that clear. This is just what is on the ground floor. The other thing I want to note about the ground floor, and it's something that we've spoken to staff about, is the lack of commercial on the ground floor. This is an apartment building. There's no commercial proposed at this time. We feel that commercial isn't necessary on the site. There's commercial next door on both sides. We're a short walk to Grimsby on the Lake, which has a lot of commercial uses. We feel it's not necessary. We submitted a study to the city actually to show that we're not having a negative impact by not having commercial on the ground floor. I think it's something that we're going to continue to discuss with staff, but just wanted to be clear here. This is a single-use apartment building. There's no commercial on the ground floor. Next slide, please. Landscaping. So this is just a preliminary landscaping plan that we put together here for this stage. This will be further refined and detailed at later stages. But the idea is we're going to plant trees in front of the building, provide some buffer to stark contrast to the surface parking we have on Nurse Service Road. We're going to need to extend the sidewalk as well. There will be a fence along the north lot line and a landscape buffer. I will say, shown on here, Tower A, the 22-story tower, that's a 3-meter setback, 3-meter setback on the ground floor, I want to be clear. And on the north tower, it's a 1-meter setback, but that's only on the ground floor. It steps up, and I have more slides showing this in the future, but this is just to get a sense of what the landscaping will be. Next slide. We were asked to provide a streetscape plan from the town, so this is just a straight up view of both the towers, what they would look like. We have the 22-story on the left, the 16 on the right. One of the things that was important to us was a very large separation between the towers. That separation is 26 meters. The other thing you can note here is the towers, like I said previously, they don't just go straight up 22 and 16 stories. There's separations and step backs at various levels. We went with a 6-story podium here, and the towers go on top of them. I do want to note, because this is from the QEW side, on the north side, which is the side that faces the townhomes, they achieve, the Tower A achieves a 6-meter setback from the property line, to be clear. So that includes that landscape buffer as well. And then Tower B is a 5-meter setback. So Tower B, the shorter tower, is slightly closer to the townhomes than the larger tower, the 22-story tower. So that's the streetscape. Next slide. So now we're going to get into like the nitty-gritty of the proposal here. So close up, Tower A, 22 stories, that achieves about 326 units. Tower B, 16 stories, 222 units. The exact number of units is probably going to fluctuate a little bit, but that's what we're targeting right now. Next slide. Underground parking. So like I said, 5 levels of underground parking. You come in, and on the left side of that image there, you corkscrew down. So we have 606 spaces is the count. That's 1.1 spaces per unit. 104 are tandem spaces. So what does that mean? The tandem spaces are on the south side, and what that means is effectively there's a parking space behind a parking space. The idea here is that these tandem spaces will go to units that want 2 parking spaces. So they wouldn't be sold to separate units, so you don't have that conflict. The tandem spaces would be sold to 1 unit, so they can coordinate with the tandem parking there. The bylaw requires 1.25 spaces per unit, okay? So we're short by about 0.15 spaces per unit. One of the things, and I'll get into this a little bit more is staff asked us for a traffic study. We submitted a traffic study to the city. They also did a parking study. So what the parking study looked at is two things, is existing developments, what parking do existing developments have? We find in this area, existing developments, high-rise developments, I'm not talking about singles or towns, achieve about a rate of 1 space per unit. They also looked at car ownership in this neighborhood, and car ownership on average, it averages out to about 0.93 spaces per unit. In our opinion, from a parking perspective, we're meeting the parking demands for the site. Each of these parking spaces will be unbundled. And just quickly, what that means is if you were to purchase a condo in this development, you have the option to buy a parking space. A parking space won't necessarily be assigned to you. It's an extra cost on top. So there's that choice there as well. And I didn't put it on the slide, but I think it is worth noting. Grimsby's bylaw doesn't have a requirement for bicycle parking, long-term bicycle parking in apartments. We decided to include bicycle parking in this development. It's a community that we think needs it. There's definitely opportunities for other modes of transportation like cycling. So that's also been provided in this development as well. Next slide, please. I just want to talk a little bit about amenities. So this is a great way to show how the podium interfaces with the tower. So just to be clear, this is both, I talked about the bike parking, it was 417 long-term bike parking. The amenity space, we have just over 4,000 square meters of amenity. That's both indoor and outdoor. That works out to about 7.5 square meters per unit in terms of amenity space. And just for some context, I know that number might not mean a lot to some folks, but typically we target 4 to 5 square meters per unit on average. So we're above that. Maybe I'll stop here and just note with these amenity spaces. So the way they're designed is that, so there will be a screen looking towards the north. They're also stepped back from the ground floor as well. So they're stepped back nice and far from that north property line, and there will be a screen. This is definitely not a final design. What we typically employ in a lot of our site plans is we purposefully stop the amenity space 1 or 2 meters from the edge, so no one's peering over and looking over, and there's some separation there. But I just wanted to provide some context in terms of what amenity is going to be provided on site. Next slide. Okay, shadows. This is going to be a big topic of conversation anytime you propose high-density development. We submitted a shadow study to the city, the town. The shadow study is simulated on March the 21st. The reason why it's March 21st, because that's when the shadows are longest, okay? The shadow study shows it hour by hour, to be clear, and that's what staff have. Just for brevity's sake, I haven't included every single hour throughout the day in this, but I just want to show this to everyone just to get a measure of what the impact is. So the blue outline is the shadow from our development. Anything else you see in gray are shadows that exist on the site. So on the left there, March 21st, 10 a.m., we're shadowing completely to the west there's no shadows towards the north. As the day goes on, the sun moves in the sky, we start to shadow towards the north. And we do shadow part of that park by 12 o'clock. But if we're looking carefully at the 12 o'clock photo, by 12 o'clock, the shadows, yes, they're on the northern property. They're on the parking area and the private road. They're not impacting any amenity areas. And something interesting does happen with the amenity areas. If you go to the next slide, please. So now we're at 2 o'clock. We have shadows on townhouse dwellings. And I appreciate it might be a little bit difficult to see. We have shadows at 2 o'clock, and then by the time 4 o'clock rolls around, the shadows move away from the park. And it's difficult to see, and staff definitely have a better image of this, is the shadows that we are casting is shadow inside of shadow. So you see there's parts of gray areas that are already shadowing onto folks' backyard, and the development is just adding on top of it. So I think it's an important note. And then after 4 o'clock, of course, the sun then sets and the shadows are gone. So I think it was important to provide that to folks here just so they could see. And we can do our best to answer any questions on this in terms of the shadow impact. Next slide, please. One of the other things, I talked about parking previously, but we did do a traffic study on the traffic impact. And I just want to talk about a bit how traffic studies are done, because there's a lot of simulations involved and a lot of crunching the numbers. Effectively, what our traffic consultant does is they look at the background traffic conditions of what things are today. Then what they do is they forecast out 10 years in the future. They compound whatever the traffic is 2% year over year for 10 years and figure out, okay, what is that traffic? Then they say, okay, if we add this development, what is the impact from a traffic perspective if through that 10 years compounded year over year? Our traffic study in terms of the local traffic impact, it's negligible in terms of the numbers. That's what our study shows. There are 2 dots here that show, and mind you, this is at full build out, right? When everyone's in their living room and living in this thing. The traffic, there is a minor impact on the the westbound left turn lanes, and our recommendation is the city add additional left lane queuing just for those 2 intersections at Winston Road and North Service. That is effectively the impact from a local traffic perspective. The other big one is the Casablanca Boulevard interchange. That's a huge one. So what I can report is that MTO is working on upgrading that interchange completely. Staff can probably confirm this to us, but construction is going to start soon on upgrading that interchange. We've incorporated that into our study. And in terms of when the interchange is upgraded, it coincides perfectly when occupancy is expected for this development. Right now, assuming everything were to go smoothly, we had to put a date on it, roughly 2028, right? Would be fully occupied, which would coincide when the interchange is going to be upgraded. So our traffic study concludes when the interchange gets upgraded, there will be no traffic impacts from this development. Next slide, please. Okay, noise. This ties into a bunch of things. So I mentioned earlier about the 15-story condo and why it looks the way it does, and what happens from a noise perspective. The highway is very loud. So we did a couple things. I'm not going to go in great detail about what all those dots mean, but effectively, the QEW side is very loud. It's so loud, in fact, that what we have to do is we have to upgrade all the windows on that side of the building to at least STC 40. That's effectively a triple pane glass window to mitigate the noise coming from the QEW. We also need acoustical noise barriers, which will be provided on the amenity areas as well, facing QEW. The price of the price of the architecture is because of the noise study. Could a single loaded building be done similar to next door? I think if you go to the next slide, we have renderings of the building. We think this is much more appropriate in terms of a built form, in terms of architectural detail. It's got a little bit more of a visual quality. It acts as a landmark. You know, everyone will know this is the Winston Road secondary plan area. This is Grimsby on the Lake. These buildings will be seen from the QEW. And effectively, the triple pane windows is going to be needed to mitigate the noise from the QEW. And those sort of what the buildings are going to look like. I thought it was important to provide renderings today. Happy to hear any feedback specifically on the architectural of the building. I think with that, I'm about to close here. I think there's one more slide just showing another angle of the buildings as well. Yeah, there is. That's the building that you'll see from North Service Road. So I think with that, I've left things sort of open for questions on purpose. Franz and I certainly invite questions from both the committee and those in attendance today. That'll conclude my presentation, but I think through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know how you want to, I know we have delegates today. Franz and I are happy to take down copious notes and come back up if that's easier. Or you can ask questions now or whatever's easier for the committee.
Yes, thank you, Ryan. So we're going to start with the question period now. We'll bring up each speaker who's registered one by one, which they all have 10 minutes. And I think it'd be best that we reserve questions to the end of all the speakers.
Okay.
But we'll take that as an ongoing basis. So each presenter may speak only once. If you hear your comment presented by somebody else, please try not to duplicate comments. All the comments are being recorded, and staff and the consultants are taking detailed notes. So when you're called, we ask that you state your name and your address. We have some people joining Zoom as well? Okay. When addressing council, shall confine the remarks to the business at hand and shall direct the comments through the chair. Staff are taking notes of all the questions this evening, and the consultant will be responding at the end. If you feel that you have any further questions that haven't been brought up tonight, you can always email planning@grimsby.ca. So with that being said, we'll open it up to the floor now with our first speaker being Pam Kapp. Pam, if you'd like to come to the podium.
She's on Zoom.
Pam is on Zoom.
I see her. She's on.
Can you hear us, Pam? We'll circle back to Pam, and we'll ask Ashley Pasavad to come to the podium. Ashley, in the house? No? No shows. Going once, twice. Tony Digba? Is Tony in the house? Shema? Is there Shema? Do you want to come to the podium? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So how long should it be?
You have 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I bought my house in early 2022. I know you mentioned I should mention my property, so my unit number is 541, unit 83. So I will be overlooking the tower. Okay, so I'm an intern architect. So before purchasing the house, I've checked the zoning bylaw, and I could see that it's zoned as service commercial with a maximum height of 8.5 meters. Now it's changed to mixed high density residential zone with a height of 73 meters. And my house used to look at the escarpment, and I enjoyed all the showers of light. Now it's going to be blocked. According to the sun shadow study on the website, okay, so from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. in April 21, there is a 3 hours of sun blockage in 2 seasons. Sorry, in 1 season. From 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. in September and March 21, there is a 5 hours of sun blockage in 2 seasons. And from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. in December 21, there is a 7 hours of sun blockage for a whole seasons. I know, like you've mentioned, there's an existing shadow, but all the southern property, there is no shadow. There's no shadow because there is no buildings throwing shadow on front of the southern properties. Also, just a moment. Also, for the parking, there is a 79 parking spots shortage. I don't know where they're going to park. Also, this will impact the schools. We have only one school in this area. Yeah, and also the lack of commercial buildings. It's not bringing any commercial units, so there's no services provided. Right now, I don't know what should I do. The property, I could not sell right now because the property will be lowered. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Shema, for your comments. We'll go to Ben Morris for the next speaker. Okay. Kathy Neeser, would you like to go to the podium? Yeah, we're going to open. Yeah, we're going to open the floor. I'm just going through the registered speakers first. After, I'm going to put it to show of hands.
We're all together. Yeah.
Okay, whoever would like to go first. If you could just state your name and address, please. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Andy Marchant, M-A-R-C-H-A-N-T. We're at 550, 560 North Service Road, the neighboring complex here. And two questions. The first is, oh, thank you. Is that better? Thank you. I'm a little short. All right, it's a little short. How's that? So the first question is, with respect to the parking studies, you noted that you were requesting a deviation to allow for fewer parking spots per unit in the building, and that you had compared and contrasted to some other developments in the area. We've already, as the previous speaker noted, that this is a reduction in the overall number of parking spaces, but it seems to me that some of the other complexes you would have compared to in the area also have commercial, and so if you're actually reducing the number of parking spots, it's not a fair comparison. It might be a bit of an apples and oranges. So were the studies, the similar buildings compared mixed use, or were they purely residential? Our concern is that the reduced number of parking spots here is going to impact our building, which already has tight parking, and we're actually doing a parking study ourselves now on how to better manage the resources we have. The second question is, you mentioned 5 levels of parking. You still can't hear me? Sorry. Thank you. Sorry. How's that? The second question relates to the number of parking levels. Now, how does this relate to, was there any study done to relate how this relates to the water table? Have any other similar buildings dug this deep? How will that impact upon the neighboring properties if we're doing an excavation of this size? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
That concludes all the registered speakers, so I think I'd want to give the consultants an opportunity to interject here. Just, I'm sure a lot of people have the same questions, and then we'll open the floor to anybody who else wants to speak.
Okay, folks, thank you for coming up and asking those questions. Maybe what I'll do is I'll start backwards here. So the first question was with respect to how many levels of underground. So 5 levels of underground. We have to do what's called a hydrogeological study to find out where the water table is. A lot of developments these days, depending on where the water table sits, will have to what's called bathtubbing the development, which means that concrete goes outside and around. And in terms of construction, as it's excavated, what happens is there's shoring walls that are put up. Not to get into too much detail on the minutiae of shoring, but effectively what has to happen is, and this is what happens at the detailed site plan process, is a shoring plan is prepared, and depending on the quality of the soils, the type of shoring is different, but effectively the walls are shored, and it's dug out to 5 levels, and then the building is bathtubbed. So it's an excellent question, but the details we worked out at the site plan stage. This is the official plan and zoning stage. So effectively what's being discussed is, how high the building should be, what should the built form be? Those are excellent questions. They're detailed construction matters, and it's matters that LJM, as well as us, are intimately involved with all the time, because we do a ton of site plan applications like this. So sorry, it's not 100% answer to your question, but it is something we have to consider in the detailed design process, 100%. In terms of the parking study, okay. So I don't remember offhand exactly which properties. I know one of them was the Odyssey building. That's a 20-story with the which has ground floor commercial and the townhomes. That parking rate was approved at one per unit. And the fact that we don't have commercial on the site actually decreases the parking demand because we don't have people coming and going just to visit the stores and leave the site. I think that's all I can really speak to in terms of like the parking study and the rate. Like, we feel this rate is totally appropriate for the area. It's supported by a parking study. If staff have issues with it, we can certainly look at it, but every indication we have is that the parking study works from a demand perspective. One of the one of the questions was about the impact on schools. So as part of this application, what we do, or what staff does, I should say, is they circulate all the school boards in the area. And effectively, the school board looks at the development and they say, okay, well, based on our enrollment and such, can our schools handle it? So I don't have an answer for you, is the answer. Staff have circulated the school boards. If there's an issue that'll be brought up to us, we'll have to take it into consideration. I'm sorry, you had a ton of questions about the shadow study. So you said you lived at 541, that's the Waterview development to the west? Okay. Okay, I don't know where Unit 83 is in that development. Here's what I'll say about shadows, and unfortunately I can't pick out your development specifically. So in terms of shadows, we look at March 21st, like I said. I think you mentioned today, I think December 21st you mentioned as well. In December 21st, unfortunately, just because of the way the sun is in the sky, everything is in shadow. Because it's so low in the sky at that time of year. So, which is why we use March 21st. It's more fair comparison. Also, like generally speaking, no one's out in their backyard enjoying their patio in the middle of December. Generally speaking, so we use March the 21st. Unfortunately, I don't know where your unit is in relative to the development. We can discuss it after, but I can't evaluate what you feel the block's views or the impacts are because I don't know where your development sits or where it is. Perhaps we could chat about that further after the formal discussions taking place, but from a shadow perspective, I think here's the last thing I'll say. Typically the test we use is that we don't want any spot to be in shadow for greater than 3 hours in any given day. That's the test on March 21st, to be clear. So again, I don't know where your unit is, but we think we passed that test in terms of the shadow study that we submitted. So I think I'll leave it there. I hope I answer your questions as best I can. Unless the committee or more folks have questions. I think that was everything.
We've connected with Pam, and Pam's on Zoom, so we'll get back to her, and then we'll open it to the floor. Pam?
Yes, no, thank you. Sorry, I have to be on my way to work, but this has been interesting to follow. I am a Pam Kipan, and I'm one of the residents at 560 North Service Road. And my questions really are, as a resident of the first two LGM buildings in Grimsby that I know of, and have had to be subjected to several surveys, an increase in our condo fees over a very short period of time, substantial increases, and just see the I would say impact of the construction that apparently has not gone as planned with flooding and so forth. I am extremely concerned that we have the same developers building two adjacent buildings and the impact that will have again on the current residents. I'm not quite sure if the 540 and the other are be part of the entire LGM building, meaning would we be subjected to any of the damages that occur with those buildings, and subsequently have our condo fees increased even more. So my question really is, why is it that Grimsby has not heard its sins and continue to build with a builder that has not really cared for the residents nor for the construction?
I'm not going to ask the consultants to reply to, I'm going to stay, we have to ask that the questions remain focused on this development itself and not the past one, as it would be imprudent to comment on anything. I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, maybe just one little thing. No, I can't speak to the Waterview development, but I think it's important just to make clear to the folks in attendance. This building, if built, it will be a separate condominium with its own condominium number, with its own condominium board, with its own fees. So I think that's important. They might be beside each other, but they are separate applications and separate condominiums. So I think that was just important to note.
Okay, this time we'll open the floor to any questions from the crowd. If you just want to raise your hand, come on down to the podium and just state your name. Name and address, sorry.
Sorry. My name is Tamila Mitchell, and I'm resident at 560 North Service Road, the building that LJM built a couple of years ago. And I'm also on the board of directors of the Condominium Corporation. And I can relate to what the previous speaker was saying about the quality and about the builder not being trusted. The number of shortcuts that they took is staggering. What we're dealing with is outrageous. And sometimes I wonder how LJM passed the multiple inspections that they did. And that's my question to town. And my ask of the town, can you please be more thorough and diligent with LJM this time? Because what they've done sometimes is short of word crime. That's all I have. And I do believe we will continue this discussion further, because the problems don't go away. They tend to pile up and accumulate. And I'm just scared to say to the resident, as a board, as a representative, that, guys, the condo fee is not going to go down, because the amount of deficiencies that we have to deal with is outrageous.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else from the crowd who would like to come to the podium? Yep, just state your name and address.
Kathy Neisser, 550 North Service Road 308. We currently, between 550 and 560, have a lawsuit against LJM, a civil action lawsuit.
I understand that, but I think for the purposes of this meeting, we need to focus on the planning application at hand and not comment
Well, hopefully
on.
the town of Grimsby will take that into account and what's going to happen.
We certainly hear you, but I think we shouldn't comment on ongoing litigations at this time. So I'd ask that unless staff want to provide any updates, which I see are shaking their heads, that comments be tailored to this development or this planning application as it pertains to itself. Thank you. Yep.
Janet McDermott, 46 Waterview. I'm in the Branthaven subdivision. About 3 weeks ago, we had issues with plumbing, meaning sewage from city, sewage from our area. Just wondering, has anybody taken into the plan of how much sewage is going to come from the new buildings? Not sure if piping's been wrong or it's just the city's too small for everything coming in. That's just my question.
We'll pass that to Walter.
Yeah, thank you, through you, Chair. I'm not familiar with the specific concern that you have with regard to your site, but every development proposal is reviewed on the basis of the ability of the existing infrastructure, meaning water, sanitary, road infrastructure, and so on, to be able to accommodate any new development. And that's reviewed by our Public Works Department. And in terms of capacity to treat water and provide water to the site that's treated, and to treat sewage of the town on a whole, the region of Niagara is responsible for water treatment and sewage treatment. So all of these agencies consider every development proposal that comes forward and the capacity of the existing infrastructure, meaning the pipes that are in the road, and the ability of those pipes to be able to support any additional development and the expected flows from those developments. If you could come, so people watching can hear you.
Sorry, what I have learned from that situation is that Branthaven owns the sewage in their area. It doesn't belong to the city. It only belongs to the city on Place Polonaise. So now I've learned the different subdivisions that get made, it's up to that subdivision to look after their sewage. So that's what I'm saying about building another new building. It's a different entity. So I'm not sure if I've been told right or wrong, because that night I was up till 2:30 in the morning between the city and Branthaven and a company from Hamilton, because everything overflowed. The whole subdivision. Okay.
Do we have anybody else that would like to come to the podium to speak? Yep, come on down, address and name.
Hi, my name is Samantha Scarcelli. I'm a resident at 541 Winston Road, Unit 85. I will be directly behind the condo that is 22 stories. My question, or more so feedback, is you mentioned the 20-story development Odyssey that was recently approved with the subsequent condos that were surrounding, townhouses that were surrounding. That development was done in parallel. So the townhouses and the units within the townhouses were all bought with the notion that the condo would be developed around there. And they are also a 3-story townhouse with 0 backyard. Sorry. So I guess my feedback is, when buying this unit with a backyard and a amenities location, I had no indication that there would be any shadow or like you're taking the shadow is essentially from my backyard and the amenities right beside me. So I guess just feedback, and how is that taken into consideration when you're using a building that is essentially not the same?
Yeah, thank you for your comments there. Give consultants an opportunity to jump in here.
Yeah, thanks for your comment. Totally get it. So I think maybe just quickly, so on the first part, understanding folks buy houses, and especially in areas where development hasn't quite occurred yet, sometimes things change. I totally get it. This process here that we're going through is the reason why people just can't build buildings. We have to submit applications, have meetings like this first, right? So I totally get it, okay? Now, in terms of shadow, I think really how I want to handle, again, I understand where you live. I don't know your specific unit, and the shadow impact is different for different folks. So here's all I can tell you in terms of how we look at shadows and how we evaluate it. I think it's important to understand that, and I showed it in my shadow study previously, these buildings do not shadow any one place all day from 8 a.m. to sunset. That's not the case. The shadow moves across throughout the day. Again, I don't know what specific unit you are in. Our indications from the shadow study, if I could sort of describe it in my mind, the townhouses that aren't back-to-backs, that have a small backyard, that face south onto our site, by the time our buildings are shadowing, which is only a small period of the day, less than 3 hours on March the 21st, our indications based on our study is that it's shadow inside of shadow. Again, the shadows are not all day, and again, that is one part of the year. For example, if we showed like the June 21 study, the shadows would be different then, right? Because the shadows aren't as long. So I think what's important is, I think the shadow study is actually posted online. And maybe perhaps if you give staff your address, we can look at it on a specific basis. But before your feedback, I think all we have is just the macro of, okay, does it impact a specific area greater than 3 hours a day? And on March 21st, that is what we see. So Franz, I don't know if you have any more to add, but just want to, make sure.
I think the only other thing that I'd like to add, just to provide a few comments of clarification from what Ryan's just mentioned, is when we assess shadow studies, we assess the impact of those shadow studies. We assess those shadow studies in light of the impact on amenity spaces. So when we look at the property to the north, the amenity spaces of those particular townhouses are to the north of the townhouses. In this part of the world, shadows only fall to the north of any particular building. So when you look at those units that have amenity spaces directly to the north, those spaces are already in shadow from the two-story developments that exist. So I'm sure that any one of you that live in those particular units at almost any part of the day sit in your rear yard and on the portion of the deck directly next to your house, and maybe for the majority of your property, are very likely in shadow for a good chunk of the day as it stands already. That shadow and the angle and declination of the sun follow the exact same shadow that you have there, which is what typically runs into in most situations, which is the shadow in the shadow situation that my colleague Ryan here has described. So when we assess the impact, we look at what is the existing shadow on that amenity space to begin with, and what does the new building contribute to that shadow in that same amenity. So when we say that there is no impact, that is what we're assessing, is the fact that there is already a shadow in that rear yard. I hope that provides some greater clarification.
Is there anybody who hasn't spoken that would like to speak? Annette? Thank you guys for the answer.
Through the chair,
I need your name and address, please.
Annette Gibbons, 9 Lawrence Avenue, Grimsby. There's a person that couldn't be here today, and they asked me to ask some questions, and it might be to the planning department or the proponent, I'm not too sure. They would like to know where the community activity center is going to be located, because this is a community, not just condos, right? Where are the schools and the churches? Where are the sidewalks connecting the community to Oak School? Where are the playing fields? Is there a library planned? By the time all the development is done, how many units will be in the community for both sides of Casablanca? Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. Is there any other members of the crowd or audience that would like to speak? I see a hand in the back there.
Hi, my name is Tina Squigna, and I live on Sidera Court. And my question goes to the parking, because parking seems to be a really big issue in Grimsby. And all of the new developments that you've put in the Winston area or Grimsby on the Lake all seem to suffer from lack of parking. And every developer says the same thing, that they're going to do something about it, but they don't. And now you're talking about taking away spots. I work straight nights, 7 days a week, so I see traffic every single day coming home from Burlington. The QEW is a parking lot from Casablanca to almost the third line. I don't know how these people do this every day, but that tells me how many people have relocated to the Niagara region. So I don't know if you think that cars are going away anytime soon, because they're not. And the thing is, it's not like in Grimsby, we can walk out our door and get on a bus and go to work, or walk somewhere. There's nowhere to walk to unless you live in the town, which I do not. So for me to go anywhere, I've walked to Starbucks, and it's taken me almost an hour just to walk there. So I don't think I'm going to be walking to Superstore to get my groceries. But as far as the parking goes, 1 spot per person is ridiculous. Most families have two-car families. Why? Because we all have to go to work. And some of us even have more cars. Now, the type of condos that you're probably talking about building probably aren't really designated for large families. They're probably going to be, 400 or 500 square feet. Maybe you're going to get some single young people moving in. But once they get a family, they're going to want to sell it and move out. They may have a car. Some of them may work from home. But again, this is something that I think you need to look at for the future, because, like I said, cars aren't going anywhere. We rely on them for everything that we do in our daily lives. I don't think that anyone wants to walk to their kid's hockey game pulling a hockey bag with them. So what can be done to ensure that there will be adequate parking in these new buildings, and that the tenants won't have to suffer because they maybe don't have enough parking spots that they can purchase, especially at the prices of what they charge for these parking spots. I think they're running between $60,000 to $80,000 per spot. So when you add that on top of a $1 million condo, not too many people are going to be buying 2 parking spots, but they do require maybe 2 parking spots. So my question is, what can you do to increase the parking allotment to the tenants and also to the people in the community that go to visit this area, such as Grimsby on the Lake, and they like to walk and enjoy all of the amenities? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tina. I'll give an opportunity for either staff or the consultants if they wanted to touch point on the parking question.
I think I'd like to answer some of the previous questions, but in terms of the parking, why can't they provide parking? That's for the applicant to address. This is their proposal. There is a question about community activity center, schools, churches, total population. The Winston Road secondary plan was in place when the Parks and Recreation Master Plan was done for the town. The Winston Road secondary plan included provisions where the municipality, based on the anticipated population, wanted to provide parks, which is primarily along the waterfront, where you see it now. There may be some more acquisition and park development that you'll see in the future as developments occur along the waterfront. But there also are 2 other park locations, community park locations. One is immediately abutting the site to the northwest on either side of the watercourse that's there. The Parks Master Plan identified what facilities or features the parks should provide. We're working towards that with a limited budget that we have available to make improvements to the parks, including the park in the immediate area to the site, which is abutting the northwest side. Churches, we have no control over churches. Schools, school boards, as Mr. Ferrari has indicated, school boards get circulated. Every application that we receive, they participated in our secondary plan process, so they're familiar with how much development is intended to occur in this area, and they do their planning accordingly based on and in the immediate area, you've probably seen some expansions to schools in the neighborhood. On the other side on Oaks Road with Smith School, there's been some recent expansions based on new population growth in the neighborhood. As well as Lady of Fatima School. There was a significant addition a few years ago. And now there's a new addition being put on Lakeview School. So that's the schools. They do their own planning based on our official plan policies and projections. I believe the estimated population for the neighborhood is about 8,000 once it's fully built out. Again, that might fluctuate depending on, like in this particular case, there was not an estimation for this amount of units on this particular site. Those estimates were based on existing official plan policies and how much floor space you're allowed to build on any particular lot, which is in the high density was 3 times the lot area, and in this particular area was 2 times the lot area. Other sites didn't develop to the full potential, like the townhouses to the north of this site, didn't achieve the full potential that was available to it through the official plan in terms of how many units could be supported. So there may, at the end of the day, less here or more here, you may end up with the same amount. But that was the number that I believe we estimated upon completion of the secondary plan. And that's summary. Thank you.
Thanks, Walter. Yeah, so I just wanted to take a quick stab at some questions about the amenity and the interchange. So I think I mentioned in my presentation, MTO is upgrading the Casablanca interchange. I think it was mentioned that traffic backs up. MTO is working on constructing and upgrading the interchange. I mentioned that in my presentation. In terms of parking, so like I said, I think you would be shocked at when you propose apartments, what the amount of parking you actually need is. I know it sounds crazy, but when we come back with these like wonky numbers like 0.93, they're based on something. There's a traffic manual. It's called the ITE traffic manual, and it's based on data that's collected, and it's used to inform the parking rate. I said previously, the as of right parking rate is 1.25 per unit, and we're just under at 1.1, so it's 0.015 less. It's supported by a parking study. I think, and I've asked LJM this before, this has happened on other developments, is not all the parking spaces end up actually selling most of the time. But believe it or not, some people actually go without a car. It seems to be a generational thing now. I'm a little bit younger than Franz, for example. Millennials don't have cars as much, right? So I think just we need to take that into account. And also the difference is if some folks live in a single detached dwelling or a townhome, the parking needs differ. A lot of folks live in apartments, believe it or not, they go without cars. I know, but they do. So I just thought that was important to know. In terms of amenities, so I mentioned in my presentation, we had about 4,000 between both towers, square meters of amenity, which is about 7.5 per unit. And I mentioned also, I think the target is typically like 4 to 5 per unit. So there's tons of both indoor and outdoor amenity on this development site. So I hope that answers the questions. And Franz, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Not so much. And Ryan, thank you for being very kind and saying that you're only a little bit younger than me. But, I think that this is something that we are running into, and I think Ryan's nailed it in the sense of saying it's a generational thing in terms of parking. We're in a situation right now where we're very plugged in on a lot of these parking rates, and one of the big studies that is constantly run by your government, by the region, by private consultants constantly is car ownership and car purchasing. And the other flip side to a lot of these parking spots, and I think, Tina, you made an excellent point in saying that they go for $60,000 to $80,000 a piece, and you're absolutely correct. I think that's a very astute number. The reality is that what we're seeing in a lot of these developments that have been recently approved over the last little while across Ontario is that at the end of the day, believe it or not, and I know you probably don't, but what we're finding more and more is that there are parking spaces that are left over. There are parking spaces that are not purchased. The cost of those spaces are passed on to the end user. We are in, right now, an unprecedented situation where we do have a housing crisis and we have a massive affordability crisis. A big part of what contributes to those costs are parking spaces specifically. We have had developments throughout Burlington, Mississauga, Niagara, you name it. We're finding at the end of the day that we have parking spaces left over. That is a cost that is passed on to the end user. That is a major contributor to the cost of housing in this province. And what's frustrating is that when they're not even used. You're finding the trend more and more. It started in Toronto, a 0 parking rate for residential units. Granted, that's Toronto. It's coming to Mississauga. Hamilton just today passed that exact same bylaw that reduces the parking to 0 for residential units over a huge swath of the city and reduces it further from there. We talked about how cars are going to be there forever, Tina. I'm sorry. The reality is the numbers are empirically correct, and they definitely show that that is not the case. It's hard to believe, but it's true. So those are numbers that are directly from your government. We see them every day, and this is the new reality that we're working towards. So when we talk about parking requirements here, we look at what the car ownership rates are. That ITE survey that Ryan has referred to is a textbook that we all rely on, and we cannot continue to operate the way that we have operated in the past. We need to look forward and consider what the new paradigm is going to be in this province and in this world in terms of car ownership. That is why we're looking for a parking rate that is only slightly below. We're looking for a 1.1 rate as opposed to a 1.25. That is consistent with the neighborhood that we're seeing. We have a car ownership rate right now in our most recent studies of 0.93. We're figuring we're hitting the sweet spot right there. And if you disagree, you're entitled to your opinion. The numbers do not support that position. Thank you.
Thank you for the answers there. Before we allow anyone to speak for a second time, I just wanted to make sure that everybody's wanted to speak has had an opportunity. I see a hand at the back. Oh, sorry. We're going with the back of the room first. Stand down, stage left.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to the town for your presentation and to
Can I get you
the
to state
applicants.
your
Oh, yes,
name?
sorry, yes.
Sit
My
your
name is
photo,
Sarah Nixon. I am from, I live on Adelaide Street in Grimsby. I wanted to thank the town for your presentation and the applicants for coming today. So I live downtown. And what I notice when I go to Grimsby on the Lake is, like, I love going to the waterfront trail. Like, it's beautiful down there, and there's so many new stores that are popping up in Grimsby on the Lake, and that's really great. But I notice that, like, whenever I'm down there, I'm always surprised that there aren't as many people walking around as I would expect, because there's so many new builds, there's condos, there's towers, and I'm always a little surprised about, like, where are all the people? And I do wonder if it's because can we make the community a little bit more walkable is my question. And so my question to the applicants is there a way to make your development more walkable, add more sidewalks, for example? You mentioned those waterways that are on either side of your property, and you said they're ditches, but, like, is there a way to make them, I don't know, more biodiverse, or a park there or something to, like, bring people to that area, like make it part of, like, this living, breathing community? So that's my question is, are there ways in your own development where you can kind of build that sense of, like, a livable community and kind of bring that life to the area? And I thought of those waterways that you mentioned. Is there an option? I'm not sure what that could look like. And the same with the walkways also, like, is there a way to make that development more connected to the rest of Grimsby on the Lake so that there is more exchange of community? Because whenever I go down there, sometimes it feels that things are isolated. So is there a way to make a larger connection? So that would be my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you for the question. Big picture question. Okay. This is why, personally, I'm a planner, because we get to play with these sorts of things. Okay. Part of it, I would say, and it might be a little bit selfish to say this, is more people brings more people to Grimsby on the Lake, especially people who are close. I put up that slide earlier about that 500 meter or 10-minute walking distance, part of how you can make, or the town of Grimsby can make Grimsby on the Lake great, is to have more people there. More people brings more business, more people downtown, businesses open, right? It starts this cycle. So developments such as this one are certainly important to get approved, not only to bring more people to downtown, but to ensure there's businesses and there's justification for parks. I think another part of that component is, and why this site's actually attractive, is its proximity to the waterfront. The waterfront's very close by. There's a conservation area that, we provided long-term bike spaces here that in theory you could bike to. So all those things are part of a big picture. Walter deals with the big picture planning. Unfortunately, we can only look at this site specifically. I can say we are providing sidewalks in front to connect the property. So there will be a sidewalk connection to Grimsby on the Lake. We talked about the bike parking at length. In terms of those waterways, so I could tell you right now, I can't comment more. We did an EIS on them. We've looked at them from like an ecological perspective. Unfortunately, our consultants aren't seeing anything there. They've been out on site. They've done the botanical inventory. They've checked for fish. They just don't exist, unfortunately. If there are additional connections that can be made towards the public realm, we could certainly explore it. It would happen, I would say, at the site plan stage. Of course, Parks and Rec staff are going to review this as well. If Parks and Rec staff have a recommendation, we can look at that as well. I think it's a great question you asked. It's an important question. It's a big picture question. This development, in our opinion, would be one piece of it. Because Grimsby has something great to build off of in terms of Grimsby on the Lake, and proven developments, getting more people down here, I think would help immensely. So I don't know if that answers your question specifically, but thanks for asking it.
Yeah, just briefly, above and beyond the built form of the development and all the other issues we're dealing with. But in terms of walkability, the site does abut the park, so there are opportunities there, and there are and would be sidewalks connecting either side, like Ryan mentioned, either side of the site along the service road. So there are opportunities to go east-west as well as north, and that's something that we'll look at through also our Parks Department and see what kind of connections are appropriate and desirable. And then from the ecology of the watercourse to the west of the site, this is something that we rely on the experts at the region of Niagara to look at. They will be doing an analysis of the site assessment that was done by the applicants, and they'll provide recommendations to us. And then once we get all the comments from everybody, then we'll sit down and formulate some kind of recommendation through Manny, and we'll make a recommendation to the town identifying what if any changes need to be made to the site. As well as, before we actually get that far, we're probably going to want to have a discussion with the applicants to see if they would be willing to consider any of the changes that are recommended or put forward.
Next.
Hello, I'm Eva Runge. I live at 19 Viking Drive, which is to the east of Casablanca in a residential neighborhood. And my husband and I are retired. We have one car. But before, when we were working, we had two cars because we lived in Grimsby and we had to go 2 different places to get to work. Now, I think all of this development that happened on the basis of this promised GO train. And if we had a GO train, then maybe, yes, we would have people that only had one car. Also, I'd like to know where you gentlemen live, where you can get public transit, where you only need to rely on one car. Here in Grimsby, the people who live in Grimsby, we don't have public transit. If we want to go to work, if we want to go shopping at the superstore, we need a car. So yes, it would be very nice if it comes to the point where there are fewer cars in this world. We're all for that. Like I say, we're down to one. But right now, until there's a GO train in Grimsby, it's just not going to happen here. Also, as far as going to take advantage of the lakefront, which we have done, we still have to drive to, well, we used to drive to the park that's now inaccessible at the end of Casablanca. We used to drive there so we could walk along the waterfront. We still had to drive. So there is a time, yes, when maybe Grimsby won't need to have cars, but it won't happen until we have a GO train. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. There was another hand in the back. So.
Good afternoon. My name is Danielle Beck, and full transparency, I am a certified planning technician, which means I am within the industry. I am familiar with the applicants this evening, but I am here as a Grimsby resident. I live at 41 Willow Lane, which is 1 street south of Town Hall. I have 3 questions or points that I would like to make on this application this evening. Questions are to staff and to the applicants. Specifically, first one is in the rise of the housing crisis. My question to the applicants is how many of these units are going to be affordable housing? My second question is I was tuned in virtually. I just did have a prior commitment, so I apologize for my tardiness to council and to staff. But my second question is I did hear that the MTO does have the intentions of upgrading the MTO intersection, or the intersection at Casablanca, but is there any intentions of upgrading the service road for the, I guess, traffic and the amount of traffic that these units are going to incur on that? And then my third question to staff was I did hear also on the virtual is that Lakeview is currently undergoing an addition. From my understanding, that addition is not to accommodate more students in the public school program. It's actually for the daycare addition. So at this point in time, there is no more capacity at Lakeview for the public school in that catchment. That is purely for a daycare addition. So that catchment is actually at capacity from what I understand. So the Oaks Road is a catchment for that school. So, okay, so I think they're also at capacity from what I understand. So I understand that that is a school board issue and they can reallocate and realign their borders. But as somebody who does have a grade 3 at Lakeview, who is struggling with EAs, with teachers, with administration in schools, this amount of units in this area is a huge concern as a parent and as a resident. So I'd like to be as succinct as possible, and thank you, Council, for your time and my questions. I would appreciate a response from the applicant and staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. At this point, I'll open up for both Ryan or Walter to answer the previous 2 questions.
Okay. Well, thank you, Danielle, and it's a pleasure seeing you again. It's always a pleasure working with you back at Hamilton, Burlington, everything else, and you always come right down to the crux of the matter. In regard to affordable housing, yes, there will be some affordable units in this. We have not established how many that will be yet. It is a practice of Mr. Meehan and LGM to do exactly that, particularly with other developments that they've already completed here in Grimsby. Those details are yet to be worked out, but there will be some. To speak to Evelyn's point in regard to the GO train coming along, Evelyn, excellent point. We need a GO train. I completely agree, and I fully encourage you to petition your government to make sure that that GO train does come, and I do believe it will come eventually. I think the other part to consider is that when we plan for these buildings, we don't plan for 5 years. We don't plan for 20 years. We don't plan for 50 years. We think 50, 75, 100 years out. There will certainly be a GO train in that time. I hope it happens sooner rather than later. I think that's a great thing to have coming to our community here, and I think it's an absolute necessity. In regard to your comment regarding 2 cars and your experience here in Grimsby, you mentioned that your home is to the west, and I'm sure you have a beautiful single-family home, and I'm sure you have a beautiful family who you had to truck to hockey games, soccer games, who knows what it may be, one going one direction, the other going the other, who knows? The reality is what we're selling here and the market that we're going to are typically 2 and 1 bedroom units. The demand on units such as that is not the same as what you're typically looking at from a typical single-family dwelling. And that goes back to some of the comments I provided earlier in terms of affordability as well. So there is a difference in terms of that, those comments. In regard to school catchment areas, Danielle, thank you for the information. Unfortunately, we haven't received the comments from the school board at this time, but that's certainly something, as you're aware, that will have to be addressed as we work through that process. And as soon as we do get those comments, something we're sensitive to, we need to see exactly how all of that works out and see what the school board's plan will ultimately be for that. I think I'll leave the other answers to Ryan here.
I don't know if Walter can provide more update. My understanding is the Casablanca, in regards to the service road, so our understanding that the Casablanca interchange, the MTO interchange, is going to be upgraded by MTO. I don't believe, Walter can correct me if I'm wrong, that North Service Road is included in that upgrade. What I can say is this development will be bringing services through North Service Road or extending them to the property. So I guess you could say that's part of an upgrade. At this time, I don't have any indication that North Service Road will be upgraded any further, other than the sidewalks and the sanitary service that will be put in to support the development, unless staff know something that I don't. So yeah. Certainly. So in terms of the traffic study that we prepared, there were no specific local improvements recommended as a result of the development. There was some note once full build out happens that there may be some issues with some left turning on North Service Road onto Winston Road. That will require additional queuing for the left lane turning. That's the recommendation in the study. And yeah, as Walter was saying, yeah, the MTO interchange will be upgraded by the MTO prior to this development being occupied. To be clear, I believe it's going to start 26, I think. I don't know if you know, Walter.
I don't know directly. With regard to the Casablanca interchange, the region prepared an environmental assessment for improvements to Casablanca from Main Street all the way to the North Service Road, which included improvements to the South Service Road, very close to the intersection of Casablanca Boulevard, to some of the on-ramps off of the westbound lanes and off of the eastbound lanes, as well as some minor improvements very locally at the North Service Road where Casablanca terminates. And it's my understanding that the region's going to be doing the work. It's my understanding that it's supposed to start this year sometime. Anyway, for what it's worth.
Thank you, guys. Going back to the floor for anybody who hasn't spoken yet that would like to speak. Is there anybody in the crowd? Going. Actually, Shema wanted to speak twice, so I'm going to circle back to Shema, but just last call for anybody who hasn't spoken yet. Okay, Shema. Yeah.
Yes, I just want to know how could I submit my letter or my questions to the city? I have it with me, but how could I email it? And yeah, that's pretty it. Like, and there's going to be another meeting after that. Okay.
Manny, would you like to answer this?
I'll just hand you my card later. But you can also email Grimsby or planning@grimsby.ca.
Okay, last call for anybody who would like to speak a second time. Yep.
I just want to add a few more comments on the parking. At 550, 560, it may seem like we have access parking on the ground level. It may seem like that, but we started looking at it. We started taking inventory of all our parking spots, and what we did realize that there's a lot of residents from neighboring townhouses are parking in our spots, and I just want to let you know that we're looking into it. We're going to take full account of all the spots, and we're going to put some measures in place to disallow parking on our property, which will probably impact everybody in the community. Because what we see now, a lot of people parking and parking for free. So just want to let you know that we're taking measures so there will be limited spaces available for public to park in the area. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I'm going to put it to the floor one last time. Seeing no more hands in the air, I'm going to bring it to the committee for any further comments or questions. And we'll start off with Councillor Frake.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the staff and I'd like to thank the agents for giving us a really thorough, in the early stages of this game, a presentation as to what's happening down there at 544 and 44. I have to be careful because I can't make big suggestions as to what you should do or opinions, so I have to stick to questions. That's what we can do at this level. And I do have a few. First of all, you mentioned in your presentation, Ryan, that there was 3,195 square meters of outdoor amenity space. I don't want to assume what that is, but I'll ask you to clarify what might go in that space. You want me to ask all the questions at once? Again, you mentioned from an amenity point of view, there was 933 meters of indoor space. And I particularly wanted to know, in this case, whether you would consider, if you haven't already, a daycare center in your complex. Because I'll tell you why, because we have had numerous folks in the town come to us and ask the developers to start considering these things in their plans. There's like 300 to 400, and I might be on the low side, of requests for space for daycare centers, for spaces, and they're just not available. So I don't know what the people are doing. And the more and more people that move into Grimsby, of course, most of them are single parents, they have kids or will have kids, and one of the most important boxes they want to tick is, well, what do I do with my kids? If I go to work, that type of thing. So that, maybe you can talk to that. Parking study, the parking issue, I believe there's a parking study happening in Grimsby right now, so I think is that area, it's done. And this area was included in that? Walter, I'm looking at you. It wasn't included in that? Okay. Should it be?
I'm sorry, Chair, my apologies. I didn't want to just shake my head, but the parking study was concluded for the Grimsby on the Lake area, but it was primarily directed to the section of Winston Road that we call the Main Street, the downtown area. That's where the parking study was concentrated on. And in addition to the old downtown and Old Grimsby.
Okay, I remember now, you're right. I thought maybe there was more of a, I thought the area was longer than that, wider than that. You mentioned you mentioned the underground, 5 levels of underground parking. And I wasn't clear on whether you could actually do that, go down that far, that deep. Was it just a conceptual view that you could do that, or do you actually have engineering studies that you can go down that far based on the water table and so on and so forth in the area? That's another question I have for you. For staff, I believe you said that the area is zoned, maybe you didn't say that. I thought someone said that it's zoned for, did I hear 8.5 stories in that particular piece of property? Right now?
Through you, Chair, the specific official plan permission for this site right now is 6 stories. It's
6 stories.
Mixed-use, medium density.
For both those
which permits
sites?
up to 6 stories.
For both those sites? For both of those sites, those two?
Yeah, it's one, yeah. They're both, the entire area subject to the application is medium density residential currently, mixed use.
So the applicant is looking for the 16 and 22, so we need to change, we would have to change our...
Yeah, so the nature of the application is to change the official plan from a mixed-use medium-density designation to a mixed-use high-density designation.
Okay.
So that's the designation that we have east of Hunter Road. It's mixed-use high-density, and which has a maximum of 12 stories. But the proposal, again, is to change that restriction to permit 22 stories and 16 stories, as well as changing the maximum density from 3 times the lot area in terms of floor area to 7.9 times the lot area. So that's the official plan amendment requested to give permission for them to build that high and that dense.
So does that come to council for council's decision when you come forward with your recommendations? Or does that decision go back to our planning department under the new legislation that was passed last year? Is that a decision that council will make, or is that a decision that the planning department will make?
This is official plan amendments and zoning amendments. If this, I'm sure if this is what the question is through you, Chair. The question has it been delegated to staff? No, it has not. Official plan amendments and zoning amendments are still under the purview of the approval of council. Okay. And council has to pass bylaws to adopt an official plan amendment and to change the zoning to permit the proposed development.
Just wanted you to say that so that the public will know. Right. I have a question on commercial. Ryan noted that there's no plans for any type of commercial space in this building. With more and more residents moving into the area, and I would like to see more and more retail commercial businesses take root down there. With more and more people moving into the area, certainly there's got to be a demand for some type of retail and commercial space, whether it be services related like dental surgeons or like daycare, like I mentioned, daycare, or like confectionery shops or whatever the case might be, or maybe restaurants. But how did you decide that we don't require more commercial and retail space down there? Can you explain to me how you got to that decision? And I'll leave it at that. I think there's 3 or 4 questions in there, and I'll leave some of the time for the other councillors. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your questions, Councillor. To speak directly to the commercial requirement that you are alluding to, we did have a commercial needs assessments done by Urban Metrics, who is a very reputable consultant that focuses specifically on these matters. They've consulted with the city here, or the town here, in the past, specifically within the Winston Road neighborhood and a lot of the employment requirements in the area. What the study revealed was that between the existing 50 road retail area and the downtown of Grimsby, what exists in the neighborhood as well, that demand does not exist right now. Now, that is in the process of being peer reviewed. That is something that will be a little bit of back and forth on that. What we want to be very careful of in terms of what we do in the Winston Road neighborhood is to ensure that whatever commercial services we do bring to the area serves the area and no more than the area. And the reason for that is the last thing we want to do is destabilize the commercial availability and usage of the downtown Grimsby area. And that's very much held up with a number of policies throughout your official plan. And that is the primacy that we want to establish within Grimsby and maintain.
Just before you move off that answer, you talked about, building a building for the future. I understand that. You can't, we're not building a town for today, we're building it for the future. And all these buildings and all these residents that are going to be filling up these spaces over the next 10, 15 years, whatever, and life goes on for the next 50 or 100 years, whatever the case might be. But as those buildings fill up and the space around them fill up, and including around the downtown area, the old downtown area of Grimsby, there's more and more demand for services and commercial and retail. So futuristically speaking, did your survey look at 15 years out? I mean, if you don't build something, commercial retail space in those buildings today, you're not going to ever get them there 10, 15 years from now, because it'll be filled up with residents. You're going to have to change the whole, and it'll be turned over to a condominium corporation. So when the consultant did that particular survey, were they looking at today or 10 years from now or 15 years from now? How did that survey work in terms of commercial retail?
So I'm not what one could consider to be a commercial survey expert. However, what I can say is that within that study and the trends we're seeing today are actually quite different than what you've outlined. Bricks and mortar and retail and the way that we've done it for the last 50 years is radically changing right now. We're seeing less and less of these bricks and mortar type retail and more of an e-based economy, much like what we see with Amazon. When if you were to ask many of the people here today, I bet you in this day and age, you're seeing more and more purchases occurring online than they are in actual window and storefronts. And particularly in these types of developments, that is the trend that we're seeing more and more of. So respectfully, I do have to disagree with your assessment of the paradigm, because I do believe that that is something that is well established as changing right now. And we're actually seeing in a lot of the vacancy rates for a lot of these commercial units and developments that we are working on across Ontario right now. That is part of the study, that is part of that discussion, that is part of what is being peer reviewed.
Okay, we'll beg to differ a little bit on that, but we'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Fair enough. You did have a comment regarding underground parking and how we can go down 5 stories. Did you want me to speak to that?
Yes, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
Oh, sure. Yeah. No problem.
Yeah, before we move on, through the chair, the commercial needs study is being peer reviewed by a consultant we hired, and the consultant, they're called Tate Research, they are taking into account not just commercial needs, but the official plan calls for that area to be served 1 job per resident, per 3 residents. So we're not just taking into account commercial, retail, that kind of thing, but employment as a whole for that area. And their study is being peer reviewed by our consultant that we hired.
And that's something we'll see soon?
Yep. So that's part of the review analysis process, and that's going to we're going to be taking their comment from our consultant comment into account and providing it back to the applicant.
Thanks, Manny.
Yeah, and that's certainly a big part of a conversation to come. And if the studies come up to reflect a different situation, then that is a conversation we'll have to have at that time. We do want this development to meet the demands of the neighborhood as a whole, and that's very important. That's a big part of the reason why we're doing that study. It's a big part of the reason why we're doing the peer review as well.
I just want to say that you can't go to a dentist on Amazon.
Fair enough.
Or daycare on Amazon, et cetera. So you know what I mean. Anyway, so there's other businesses. Thank you.
No, I hear what you're saying. In regard to the underground, 5 stories is not an uncommon depth to get down to. There is a geotechnical and hydrogeologic study underway right now to confirm the feasibility of that. Right now, we're at this high-level stage where we're looking at building out what the ultimate concept will be. We're at the conceptual stage. We're going to build out what the actual development will be. That is something that we're working through. In terms of a water table, even if there is water down there, Ryan spoke to bath-tubbing. Bath-tubbing is a term for sealing an underground parking garage, and that is the standard across Ontario in most cases these days. We used to, back when I first started planning a little more than 20 years ago now, we would have what we called permanent dewatering, which is effectively a giant sump pump that would pump that water into the sewage system to convey it away. We've gotten away from that in recent years simply because it puts too great a demand on the sewer system, on the storm sewer system. We've moved to what is called a bath-tubbing design now, which seals that water outside of the parking garage so that that does not occur anymore. So that is something that is very common. We have developments, I think, Water Shore in Burlington, we're actually down 7 stories directly next to the lake. So that's a very common thing. Well, I wouldn't say, sorry, let me correct that. It's not a very common thing, but it is something that can be done. There are engineering solutions for that. I think there's just a couple more points there.
Yeah, couple more points. You talked about amenity. So in terms of how much amenity space we have, I could tell you it's just over 4,000. In terms of the programming specifically to the amenity space, that is to be worked out at the site plan stage. Typically, and what I mean by amenity, to be very clear, is amenity for the users of the site. So there could be an indoor gym, there could be an outdoor area with a gazebo or things like that. Our landscape architect will work that out at the site plan stage. The other thing that was mentioned was with regards to a daycare. So thanks for the comment. I will note, so it's not something we'll dismiss. We can have a discussion with that with staff. I will note daycares are tricky because there are ministry requirements for daycares. There's certain amenity, like private play areas and space and how many caretakers you have for kids and things like that. So it's just something to note, but it's not something we'll necessarily take off the table either. So it is noted.
Oh, well, just to build off the daycare requirement, and Ryan spoke to some of the ministry requirements. One of those ministry requirements is noise. Okay, you were required to have outdoor amenity areas. You were required to be below a specific standard within the MPC 300, which are the noise guidelines for the province. I'm not convinced we would be able to meet those standards in this particular location here. So I understand your wish and the demand for a daycare. However, I'm not sure we'd be able to meet those specific requirements for an outdoor play area, respectfully.
Okay, is there any other questions from the committee? Member Potter.
Well, thank you to everybody, the town's team and the consultants, and to the public. Thank you for your comments. It's very passionate, obviously, in a couple of cases, and I know we all appreciate the feedback, and I'm sure the council will when it comes to future deliberations and understanding of how this can or moves forward in whatever shape or form. I just want to piggyback a little bit, and you've heard a lot about the parking today, so I want to go a little bit into a little bit of nuancy. With regard to the practicality of the tandem parking concept, to me it sounds awkward. What I assume is, if going back to what you were saying earlier about, 2 units per condo, people would share. Basically, there would be 2 cars per unit. So that's 52 condos that would have 2 parking spaces. So that means that the other condos have 1 parking space-ish, without doing the numbers too much in my head. I can't do math without a calculator nowadays. But the practicality, because I've never lived in a condo I've lived in condos, but never with tandem parking. Just how practical is it? Is my first question. I've got a couple of others. I also note on the some of the satellite photos that you showed, the area directly north, there looks like there's car parking effectively in the roadway that people would be pointed into this unit. Is that still kept? I know it's outside the property line from what I could see, but is that impacted at all by the construction and the future build here? If you can, I don't know, it's too late to flip up the diagram, but I noticed it in the satellite picture that there was parking literally just north. So I didn't know if that was a concern or a problem. I would also, I'll reframe it as a question. I was also surprised that the no retail business in the basement, similar to the existing LGM building to the west. But I also want to pick up on something that you said about more people, more businesses, more amenities, more this. You actually said those words. So where's that coming from? So my question is this it's not going to happen, or we'll look at it as we move forward with the development, and if there is opportunities for it, we will consider it? So, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is it a no-go? And that's my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for your questions. So I'll go backwards. Actually, just quickly on the north car parking. So when we shore this underground, we have structural engineers who make sure nothing's that's a nightmare scenario, right? We don't want that to happen. And the shoring walls, caisson walls will be drilled down, presumably. I'm not a structural engineer, but yeah, we can't impact that car parking at all. Absolutely not. Retail, okay. So again, here's what I'll say about the retail. I would suggest it's not a complete no. At the end of the day, the units need to be rented out at the end of the day. The worst case scenario would be you put the units in, no one's in there. So that wouldn't benefit the town either. This is why we went through the process of getting the commercial needs assessment done. This is why we went through the process of getting it peer reviewed, or staff getting it peer reviewed. And when the results come back from the peer review, we'll have to go from there. I will say, though, in terms of retail, so we have, or retail or any other commercial use on the ground floor. I don't mean to reiterate what Ron says, but really the core of the retail and what I'll say, what is called a place where people want to be, is that main street in the downtown. That's where retail is going to be more successful, restaurants and that. This site, unfortunately, right, we're bounded by, North Service Road, Queenie W. Is it more attractive as a retail place? That's debatable. I think there was a comment made before about the dental office and things like that. There's a gym, a dental office just next door. So again, it's not, we're not trying to be flippant and saying, no, we're not providing commercial. It's based on some math and some marketing that we do as well. And I'll just say this, not every building needs to have commercial on the ground floor. That is not necessarily a terrible thing, especially when there's already a ton of buildings with commercial on the ground floor. But maybe I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to, again, we'll see how the peer review of the study comes back, but every indication that we have is that commercial won't be successful here, which is definitely something we don't want. I hope that answers your question. Just quickly on the tandem parking. You're right. I can't put the numbers together specifically, but effectively what I could say is at the condo stage, these tandem parkings will be offered to one unit. And I think staff in the past have written a bylaw. I forget if it was for Odyssey. Maybe Walter can confirm that. We have done tandem parking before. It was actually written in the bylaw, and it's very specific. It says, hey, only this many spaces can be tandem parking, so we can control for that in the bylaw. And it's something that's worked out with Odyssey, and we think it could work out here. So I do hope that answers your question, and it's no different to say tandem parking, in these townhomes that there are, right? Some people park their cars in the garage, and they have a car behind. So it does work. We find it works. I hope that answers all your questions. Thanks.
Member Drew.
Through the chair, Thanks to the staff and consultants on a very comprehensive package that is put together far beyond what we see tonight in terms of reports and studies. We've reviewed some of the landscaping plan. You've got landscaping on the ground level. You've got some landscaping amenities on the 7th level. Two questions related to that. The first is you've made a decision in your planning so far that the landscaping along the service road will be fairly extensive, and that MTO setback will be used for landscaping purposes as opposed to parking in your proposal. Is there some benefit from a noise standpoint to the landscaping that is on the front face? That's the first question. The second question relates to going from the ground floor or 7th floor and going to the upper level. Will there be consideration given to what can be done potentially environmentally on the roof, whether that be green space, potentially given the size of the building, solar panels, something that can contribute environmentally? Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. I've had this conversation with noise consultants all the time. We're going to plant deciduous trees in front of the building. Unfortunately, from a noise perspective, it doesn't do too much, unfortunately, especially in the winter when the leaves fall from the trees. It doesn't give a benefit. So we're very much relying, we're going to plant the trees anyway, to be clear, but we're very much relying on the benefit of those triple pane windows, which are upgraded. And then with respect to landscaping, and I think this was noted in place in our package, and I hate to always give this answer to defer to the site plan stage, but there are spaces for green roofs. There are some terraces where there's no exit. So the only thing we could do is do green roofs. Obviously, detail to be worked out at site plan for sure. But thank you for noting that in the comments, and we'll bring it forward and look at the feasibility more at the site plan stage for sure. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further questions from the committee, before I give any remarks, I'm going to offer the opportunity to any councillors in the House who would want to come and speak and maybe ask a quick question. I see Councillor Flavio with his hand up. With that being said, we're going to limit that to less than 5 speaking. So Councillor Davoli and Councillor Howe, you can play rock, paper, scissors. I see nods from both saying no, so it'll be only Councillor Flavio.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'm going to reserve my comments. I've got numerous comments as requested in writing, but I do have questions that I think probably should be answered tonight because there are questions that are for the good of the public. Mr. Singh, in his presentation, mentioned compatibility. I think it's important that compatibility is defined. I know that compatibility doesn't mean the same as adjacent properties, but defining compatibility I think is important. So if people can write down these questions so I don't have to come back up and maybe they can answer them all together. As far as process is concerned, it's been asked, but I don't think it was answered. Will there be further opportunity for public input? Will planning report back to this committee or will it go straight to council? Because I think giving people an opportunity to see a planning report is a very important part of the process as well. There was in the presentation, the last page of our planner's presentation was a list of 17 exceptions. I think that, and this is a comment and a question, I'm wondering why that was not presented as a table where people can compare the exceptions that are being requested to what's actually allowed on the site. So there was a list including, the front yard setback, the rear yard setback, the height, and all the other things, exceptions that are being requested. In my opinion, those should each have been their own presentation, okay? But why wasn't it presented as a table and a comparison made? There was no mention of visitor parking in any of the presentations or any of the comments. How many visitor parking spaces are required? Is that part of the 1.1 or whatever is being proposed here, or is visitor parking in addition to that? The shadow study indicates it was mentioned repeatedly, March 21st. There is a park immediately adjacent to this site on the northwest corner with a parkette with a play structure. Exactly how much shadowing is acceptable for children to be in when they're playing? Because the shadow seems to indicate shadowing between September and March 21st pretty much all day long on that play structure. I think that the question of affordable housing is a very important one. So how can this committee or our planning staff look at a proposal that suggests there might be some affordable housing without knowing what that looks like, how many affordable houses are being proposed, how is affordable housing defined, how will that be distributed, how will it be sold or rented? Mr. Basic mentioned a 6-story permitted use. I thought it was 4 stories permitted here, so if people can clarify exactly what's allowed on the site, I would appreciate it, because there have been kind of different answers along the way. I'll reserve the rest of my as many of my comments as I can for in writing, Chair. But if people can answer those questions, and if you'll allow me to ask follow-ups if they're not responded to, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor DeFlavio. I'll put either staff or the consultants, whoever would like to go first.
Walter, I don't know if you wanted to comment to some of these things. Okay. Brian, why don't you take it? We'll address our issues.
Okay. Thank you for the questions, Councillor. So I wrote down a whole bunch of notes. If I missed something, my apologies. I'm sure we could discuss after. The first one that jumped out at me was the visitor parking. So right now, the way the bylaw is written is inclusive of visitor parking, so 1.1. Walter can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the visitor parking in the current bylaw is 1.25, which includes visitor parking. So we're lumping it all together, including visitor. In the parent 1.5. Okay. Okay. No, I'll clarify. So it's in the parent bylaw, it's 1.5 inclusive of visitor. We're proposing 1.1 inclusive of visitor, to be clear. Hold on. My apologies. I'm just looking at my notes here. The shadow study on the parkette. Okay. I don't know if we could pull it up again. So, like I said, I don't know if staff have a specific guideline. We use no shadow for greater than 3 hours. That Tower 22 at the beginning of the day, there's no shadows. I believe it starts at 11 o'clock and moves across the park and gets out of there, fully out of the park by just after 2. So, which is 3 hours total, and then the rest of the day, there are no shadows. Excuse me, March. I meant to say March. With regards to the park, yeah, I don't know if staff have specific guidelines, but what we've used in the past is no greater than 3 hours in any given day. Yeah, and I don't have 11 or 1 there. Go ahead, Franz.
No, I think that's all we have.
Compatibility. Different official plans, and Councillor, you hit on it. Doesn't mean the exact same development. So compatibility is a big question, right? All the studies that we do and we submit to the town for these applications deal with compatibility, right? It's more than just the type of built form that interfaces with, in this case, the townhomes. Is there a traffic impact? Can it be serviced? You know, what sorts of benefits is the development providing for the community? You know, does it have sidewalks? I think So in terms of compatibility, we did write a planning justification report. In our opinion, this development is compatible because a lot of, and staff alluded to this previously, the existing permissions. So this is why official plan amendments and zoning bylaw amendments exist to amend those provisions. So for example, Waterview, the permitted height there was never 15 stories. An application had to be submitted, vetted by staff before 15 stories could be approved in that spot. And I think that's just important to note is in terms of compatibility and context, and I showed a slide showing the different heights in this neighborhood. You know, we have a 16-story tower, which is certainly in the range, and we have 22, which granted is taller, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's incompatible in our view. Like I said, there are other developments proposing 22-story buildings, 18, 14. I show them just east of Casablanca Boulevard. And I'm sure staff, if they have a specific opinion with regard to the OP, they can certainly provide that input as well. Affordable housing is a matter that frankly needs to be discussed with staff. There's different types. When people say affordable, that can mean a range of things, right? It could be subsidized. It could be rent geared to income. They could be houses that, you know, a not-for-profit owns or the town owns. It's something that we're going to have to discuss. Like Franz said earlier, we're open to providing some percentage of affordable housing. It's a good point to bring up. Details have to be worked out. And I think those were the questions for us. I hope I got everything. I think there were some questions for staff, unless I'm...
Yes, thank you, through you, Chair, to answer some of the questions from Councillor Flavio. Yes, absolutely. Compatibility is one of the key ingredients to any review that we do of any development application that comes forward, particularly in cases of tall buildings. So that's something that we keenly look at. Compatibility has to be measured in many different ways, and shadow impact is one of them. Overlook, you know, things like that. Traffic, noise. There's a bunch of factors that have to be taken into account when looking at compatibility. The process and public input. This is the only formal public meeting that we are having for this particular project. There will be opportunities at the Planning Committee. We intend to prepare a staff report to the Planning Committee sometime before the 120 days expires, when we're required, when council is supposed to make a decision or decide on the application. And anybody from the public will have an opportunity to speak, to review our recommendation, number one, and we'll try to get that recommendation staff report out well in advance of the agenda being put out. And then residents will have an opportunity to speak to the application, however, only as a delegation to the Planning Committee. So not in this format, but you'd have to register yourself as a delegation to speak to the application. And depending on the decision or recommendation of the Planning Committee, any resident or anybody interested will have an opportunity to delegate to the council where the final decision will be made. Again, subject to any appeals that might be put forward. So that's a public process. The chart, in terms of what's permitted and what's not permitted, yeah, the better format. But that's something that we intend to provide in the staff recommendation report. We also can provide, if it would be helpful, we can prepare a comparison of what's being proposed and what the existing regulations are, particularly with the zoning bylaw and the proposed zone and the proposed modifications to the proposed zone. And we could prepare a document and we could put it on our website with all of the other documents that have been downloaded on or are being provided for public consumption on our website. Oops, I think I lost my notes. 6 stories, the existing official plan designation on the site is mixed-use, medium density. That designation permits a maximum height of 6 stories. The proposed designation is mixed-use high density, which has a maximum standard height of 12 stories. And what's being proposed is an amendment to all that in the official plan. In terms of the zoning bylaw, the site is currently zoned CS, the commercial zone, which holds a specific maximum height of 8.5 meters in the zoning bylaw. Again, shadow, like I said previously, it's an important component to compatibility, and it's something that we'll take a serious look at through our review, comprehensive review of the application, and with the assistance of urban design staff at the region, and we have an urban design specialist on staff also that'll look at that specific issue. And I hopefully answered all the questions you had, Councillor DeFlavio.
Thank you, Walter. I just had a couple of quick questions as well, too. I don't know if, sorry, you just sat down to call you back up, Walter. If you could just speak to this project in relation to the MTSA and future GO Train a bit more. I know there was a few questions earlier about that. Just wanted to circle back there.
Sorry, Chair, I didn't quite get that question.
I was just wondering if you could speak to this project in relation to the GO Train and major transit station area and how that would affect it down the line.
How the GO station would affect this area? It would have profound, in my opinion, it would have profound impacts on this area in terms of mobility, number one, and probably in terms of demand for people wanting to live in this area and businesses wanting to locate in this area. But those would be the two major impacts of a GO station.
So we had a few residents also mention the walkability of Oaks Road, and Oaks Road specifically. Are there any community benefits that would contribute to the urbanization of the Oaks Road overpass that would come from this project?
I'm sorry, which road? I didn't get that.
The Oaks Road overpass.
Oaks Road overpass? Yeah, that's something that we'll have to consider, and we'll have a discussion about accessibility to and from the south side of the Queen Elizabeth Way and the north side of the Queen Elizabeth Way, and the amenities that are available on both sides to residents on both sides. But that's a larger question beyond this particular application.
And finally, just to circle back with next steps. So I see we had it on the screen actually. So tentatively scheduled is May 27th when we'll receive a staff recommendation report to this committee, and it's June 3rd is what we have as the council decision. What is the 120-day deadline? Is it how many days after June 3rd?
It's the end of June. June 26th, yeah. It's that the issue is in June we only have one council meeting scheduled.
I see what you're saying. So we have until June 26th to respond
to June 3rd. Make a decision on the applications.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. I just wanted the public to know that for next steps, and to, if this is something you're interested in following on, to pay attention to the planning committee meeting in May.
Our goal is to notify specifically by mail anybody who's given us personal information and asked to be notified, and who hasn't been on the circulation list. But I believe we'll also circulate everybody on the circulation list that we notified for the public meeting.
Okay.
No.
We had a question from the crowd clarifying how we get on that list. Is it simply emailing planning@grimsby.ca?
Yes, there are several ways. You can fill out form that was circulated here, if you like. Or and for anybody else, if you can also provide us your contact information on our website and just identify what it's about.
Do we have any other questions from the committee? Seeing none. We'll then move on to correspondence, which there are none. Actually, sorry. Thank you for your participation in the public meeting. The consultants and staff will take your feedback. The next public meeting for the North Service Road is in May, as we said, but the open house is now over. Please contact staff at Planning at Grimsby if you have any additional comments or questions about the proposal. We'll now move through the rest of the agenda for the committee meeting. The next item is correspondence, which there are none. And then the next item is other business. Is there any other business to arise from the committee? Seeing none, the next Planning and Development Committee meeting is scheduled for April 3rd at 5 p.m. The meeting has been adjourned. Thank you for everybody for coming out.